first off, I just like to. There's two issues I just want to address. I've heard from many of you these issues around customer adoption and the challenges around customer adoption. I mean, there's a lot of really highly innovative and exciting technologies and approaches, not just technologies, but ways of doing things. Really amazing use of data sources to improve things in moving us towards a more sustainable, lower carbon future. But the question is, how do we really encourage customers to adopt those, given current business models, given current resistance within the logistics community to change? And we've heard some good ideas, but what are the underpinning threads there? And I just want to work through. I'm going to start with Justin because from a kind of significant brand operator in the space, can I have your views on what we need to do to really scale up on this?
Sure, it is. I think the minute you ask customers to pay more for something because it's better for the environment, there's a limited appetite for that. So I think in order to make the business case work, in this journey, fuel cost is often lower than it is for diesel, for example, with EVs, but not necessarily. So it's important to look for other ways of making the business case work so you don't end up charging more to customers. I think one thing that is encouraging, though, is that old people like me are possibly more inclined to not pay more for it than my daughter, who is much more passionate about this. And people who are going through school at the moment and are being taught in school about the environment are particularly passionate, I think, about areas like climate change, recycling, and so on. And those people, I think, will initially put pressure on their parents. They're the consumers of the future, and that they will make choices, I think, based on trust for retailers and what are the true credentials. So I'm kind of optimistic that people who've been taught more at school about the environment will actually drive retailers to change their behaviours in a positive way.
And I guess one of the issues there is, have we got enough time? We needed to be doing a lot of this about 20 years ago, and I'm fully on board with what you're saying, but time is an issue. What do you think, Shane?
And I agree that I think I put out the slide that say there's different drivers and things. All the different pressure points are in existence and are going to be the drivers of the change. But I think the consumer is the key in that. But actually, I think we also need to be aware of the fact that we are well down the road of the commitments that most of the big consumer brands have already made around net zero.
Okay.
And I think that if you take a sort of view of the picture of the logic of the commitments that have been made, we are entering from 25 onwards, maybe 25 to 35, the real movement years in terms of that decarbonisation. Most businesses have done a pretty good job now of reporting their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. They're doing that in ways that are increasingly standardised. I think there's pretty much the rules of engagement are pretty set now. Scope 3 emissions are now starting to be reported, and Scope 3 pretty much means supply chain.
Yeah.
And so we are entering a new phase of the conversation of we're either going to commit to what we've said we've committed to, or we're going to start rowing back. And I don't see many businesses really genuinely rowing back because of those consumer dynamics.
Okay, yeah, that's a cause for optimism, and maybe it's good to know that that's the reality and bridging the gap between what Justin was just saying and that coming to fruition. As a technology developer, really accelerating the pace of your activities, what do you see as a potential opportunity there? Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, we were looking at each other, so I assumed you.
I think you talk about it's basically the appetite for risk of the business. So it's on us as the manufacturer to reduce that for them. I mean, we've got to take ownership to that. So first of all, as I've said, we need to make a product that works. I mean, that's the first and foremost. Everyone has it's the good and the right attitude of let's improve our environment, but you can't do that at the cost of money, but also not being able to deliver the service you need to be. These businesses need to make money, and they need to employ the people they employ. It's a very complex organisations that they're running. So first and foremost, we need to make sure we've got all of our ducks in a row. Like, have we tested it properly? Does it work in all of the situations that they need it to work in? Is it cost effective? So luckily for us, whilst we are probably twice the price of a diesel fridge, the lifetime operating cost is significantly less, on average about 20%, but we've seen about 35-40% savings. So the good thing for us is a lot of businesses that we work with value their assets over the lifetime, so it enables them to see the future benefits. I think the other thing as well is giving them confidence that it's not a flash in a pan. I'm sure some of you in this room, probably you as well, have invested in tech and then it's not here tomorrow as well. So how do we give them confidence that not just we're a stable business, but also, that's for our investors, etc., but actually the technology has a life to it. So that's good it's like this today, but what's your plans for the future? What's your roadmap, and are they achievable? Are they scalable, etc.? So it can't all be on the customer to just make the change. There has to be a good enough product for them to want to buy and to operate. We believe we've done it, and lucky for us, there are some first adopters that have decided to take an initial step. They buy 5, they buy 10, and they'll operate it. And what we've understood from the market is once we've got that, the next stage of the proof of concept, which is into market, then it will rapidly grow. They just need to see it working within their environment, not anyone else's, their own environment. As I say, complex organisations, it has to work for the loaders, the depot staff, the drivers, all the way up to the person signing the check. So they need to make sure that works, and we just need to support them in that,
Right.
and go at push them a bit. I mean, obviously, to go as fast, we'd always want that, but make sure we're going at their speed of adoption and be a supportive partner, not just someone trying to sell a fridge because we want to sell a fridge.
And I think, Andy, you had thanks, Alastair. I think, Andy, you had some really interesting challenges there with your riders, and encouraging them to take on sustainability. So you're kind of at the sharp end of this, really, because you've got to encourage to tackle those Scope 3 emissions. You've got to deal with people that an element of your business model that you don't really have control of. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic you had there. Other things there that you think, from what you've heard from the others, that maybe the others could learn from?
I think ultimately, certainly I agree with the viability point from a business point of view, and if I transfer that logic onto a rider, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's really about making sure that it's sustainable for them, viable for them, where there is a reason to switch, and that reason gives them a better upside in the future. I think there isn't certainly an amount of buying power from a customer point of view that they will vote with their feet if they see the benefit, but ultimately to the kind of point around the product still has to be good. It still has to be worth the money that people are paying. I think the opportunities that we see are actually really also about being creative in how you fund some of these things. So one of the images on the slide was actually a partnership we're doing with a company called AddMoto, where essentially riders take a electric motorbike, so not an e-bike, but an actual electric motorbike, and it actually has on the back of the box dynamic, essentially full video screens, and essentially the company AddMoto essentially sell advertising space, and a good proportion of that advertising revenue goes to subsidize the bike. And so just by looking at how you can utilize an asset in a slightly different way from its core purpose helps to break down some of the barriers. And I think again there are opportunities for us to kind of think about that in a multitude of different ways. I think as a brand, and again, thinking about the big kind of green trucks, I think sometimes you've also got to think about how your brand's represented, and how you can potentially almost dial back some of the core branding to get across more of a message of we're doing this, and we're doing this for the long term and for the right reasons.
Yeah. Okay. And Chris, do you have a perspective you'd like to bring in on this from how we drive sustainability into customer adoption?
That's the big issue. I mean, there is the big issue is how we persuade people, particularly, I suppose, towards the smaller end of the market, it's great if you're a big retailer and you've got a fair amount of financial resources behind you. We were talking about Asda, for example, with tract units and LNG not so long ago. But it's how we actually get the small and medium enterprise to say, well, actually, I'm going to have to change my internal combustion engine vehicle or vehicles, and I'm going to have to do it within the next sort of 2 years. What shall I buy? There's a sort of there's partially a view which says I haven't got time to think about it now, or well, it's a bit too technical for me. Who can I go and see? And it gets forgotten. But at the end of the day, they're also worried about getting the right solution now, which is going to be good for now, but next year, back to the comments you were making earlier, that it'll see out the depreciation life of the vehicle. And at the same time, back to the curbside issues which we're having with local authorities, is how we actually persuade local authorities to recognise that we've got to have access into customers. Because at the end of the day, and I'm seeing one or two of those small and medium enterprises turning around to saying to customers, I cannot afford to serve you anymore.
Yeah, really good point.
It costs too much.
Yeah.
You'll have to find something else or somewhere else to go. And that's the last thing we want, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's how we actually get them to understand the technology and apply it properly and effectively with the help of their vehicle manufacturer, their bodywork manufacturer, and the vehicle supplier, whether that be buying it through capital or through contract hire.
Yeah, no, really good point actually, and I thanks for bringing the SME perspective into that, because particularly not only in terms of the asset itself, but also the retraining of the workforce and needing to change the skills base to deal with these new assets. That's really challenging for an SME. Hard enough for a big corporate, but really challenging for an SME on very tight resources. So yeah, thank you for that. Right, let's open it up for a bit of conversation with the audience. First hand up was here. Thank you. So again, like this morning, if you could just give your name, who you work for, or what you do if you don't work for anybody, besides going on holiday, and then your question or point, please.
I'm Peter Rogers. I'm a self-employed engineer. Lot we heard today is about moving from fossil fuel generated energy to other more sustainable ones. But as asked Andy, the delivery model is the opposite, because you're going from human powered to electric powered, which is using more of the Earth's resources in terms of batteries, motors, etc.
Interesting point. Yeah, Andy, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, so look, I think as I acknowledged, that's not the transition and that's not the kind of fleet movements we're looking for. Interestingly, though, in London in particular, we're actually seeing the transition completely the opposite way. So we're actually seeing a reduction of scooter miles compared to e-bike miles. And there are several reasons for that. They're actually more efficient for a number of different reasons. And really, when I think about going back to my kind of prior point around how do you incentivize a particular individual to make the transition, it's basically about making it a net positive benefit for them. And so we're looking at ways of really supporting riders to understand what that opportunity might be. Hence why, again, on my slides earlier, you saw us be able to demonstrate and reduce the barriers to trial. And then once people try something and they realize what the benefit might be before they've got to put their own money on the line, it then encourages that adoption. And I think the other element, which was a bit of a theme from other speakers, was around, and certainly in the session before, there's also a bit of a FOMO effect, so fear of missing out, which is you often find riders who are trying to kind of understand what are the best ways to maximize my earnings. And actually, when you have e-bike riders earning more, certainly from a net point of view, than a scooter rider because of all the other kind of ongoing maintenance and your fuel costs, that drives adoption because of the benchmarking that we get even within a kind of a network of riders.
And I think, Andy, what you've done there is you've also touched on a sort of bigger, wider point, which is reducing emissions is important. Yeah, okay, and I advocate for mitigation as tough as hardly as strongly as anybody else. But we must remember that we're doing all of this within a broader picture of sustainability, And what you're doing, and you've just articulated that, is you're increasing the economic well-being of riders and thereby society more broadly. And you're also tackling some of these kind of social problems, as well. So you kind of, we have to remember that emissions reduction is really important, but we've got to consider that within a wider frame of general sustainability across, balancing it with the economics and the social issues that we're trying to tackle. And I think we often lose sight of that in the race to net zero. I think that's really important. Okay, so another question for point from the audience. Chris, you've got something coming up there?
It's really about the consumer, also. Chris Mann, Benjamin. It's about the point that consumer, will he pay more for a lower carbon or more sustainable product? I don't think they've got a choice. So, for example, milk, Trans Farm, its carbon footprint for the milk will go from roughly 1 kilo per litre to 100 grams per litre, approximately. But they don't get paid any more for it. So therefore, it's not on the shelves. It's not labelled as a low carbon milk. If you go to beef, the Leckford Farm, that beef is going to be lower carbon beef. So I think the question about will people pay more, they don't get the choice. It's not on the shelves. Mm-hmm. And that's my question really, is to the retailers, when are they going to start labelling stuff with the actual, the environmental impact of the product, mm-hmm. and give people a choice?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I obviously have to come to Justin there, but
I think that's
go as far as you can.
I think that's a really good point, and frankly, I think, bearing in mind I'm an engineer, not a marketing person, that we could do more of that, because I think if you tell the story, people buy into it, and then they're more likely to pay more for it and to make that choice about a product that is better for the environment, actually makes them feel better buying it. They see why it might cost a bit more. So yeah, it's certainly a challenge. There's also, this probably isn't one of those examples, but in some areas it's going to be down to government to kind of pull the different levers of tax and subsidy in order to make a new technology work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably more about transport, because there's parts of the journey to get, for example, to zero tailpipe long distance heavy trucks. Very hard to see a point when they're going to be cost effective versus diesel. So there's a government policy bit with that. But in this case, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a marketing opportunity, should we say?
Okay, Shane, and I guess you can put a bit of a global perspective on this as well.
Right. What if doing it too hypothetical about it? What if things cost? I think, yeah, the problem is if you start talking about the consumer won't pay for something, but more or less agree with what you're saying, your sentiment, you're working within the frame of how it currently is supplied and the current supply chain model and the current way of working. Things change fundamentally in the last. We've had 3 different supply chain models in 4 or 5 years. If you think about the COVID period and the inflationary period we're in now, things don't cost the same today as they did 3 years ago, and the whole thing has changed, and people make a whole load of choices on the back of that because of the restructuring of the flow of things. And ultimately, it's like water; it will find a way through. So I think that I think at its worst, the customer won't pay for it is an excuse to try and maintain status quo, when in reality, particularly in this world of measuring our Scope 3 emissions, in the world of being committed to net zero, we have to have honest conversations at every link in the chain about what does it cost now to deliver in this framework, and then that will pull out the new model, and then people will compete within that model, and there will be opportunities to be cheaper or more, but from a new reference point, not from the current one.
Yeah, and I guess not everybody in the audience. I mean, I'm conscious that we're banging on about Scope 3, but maybe you could explain what Scope 3 is.
Basically, so Scope 1 and Scope 2 are the emissions that essentially the ones that you control, so either directly from the inputs into your product or your operations that you own yourself as a business. Scope 3 are the emissions of the people that are supplying services and goods into you.
Yeah. And Andy was pushing on that quite strongly in his presentation there. So Andy, customer has got to pay more.
I'll be honest, the way I see it, and obviously relatively biased coming from the industry I do, is it's not really that different to kind of food standards and organic versus non-organic. I think you can give people a choice, and ultimately they will make a choice. I think I actually do agree, though, there are some occasions when actually customers potentially don't know best. And if I think about our own operating environment, certainly in central London, we're increasingly seeing sites where the sites don't get an operating license unless it's EV only. And I think this kind of slowly kind of pushing and pulling and incentivizing and disincentivizing, I think you can get there just through those pushes, but it does take longer. But again, if I go back to my kind of point around making it kind of worthwhile to people, if I have 100 riders and they know that only 50 of them can collect from this particular restaurant or outlet because only 50 of them have electric vehicles and the other 50 don't, there's essentially less work, more work for that 50 than for the 100. So it then becomes that economic incentive to make the switch.
Chris, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was going to say from empirical evidence that I've picked up over the last month or so, those people who have got a fair number of electric vehicles are now beginning to find they're becoming cost neutral, which surprised me, to be honest. But that's the evidence that that's beginning to come through. So again, I think the more we see, the more the consumer's going to benefit as well in terms of cost deliver. At the end of the day, we're all about cost to serve, aren't we?
Okay, next question from the audience. Have we got any more questions from anybody in the audience? Okay, Ian.
Ian Constance, APC. Justin, you talked about biomethanol being used to fuel your larger trucks. Do you see that going to hydrogen? And what are the conditions that you're going to have to get to make that hydrogen work if that's the way you're going?
Yeah, sure. So we certainly know we need to get to a zero tailpipe solution. So there's of 3 choices. There's the big batteries. There's hydrogen fuel cell or hydrogen internal combustion engine, arguably, and then there's overhead wire catenary systems. All 3 of them are very, very difficult. They're all very expensive. They all require huge amounts of infrastructure. The one that personally I think is the winner, if you like, or the most likely to succeed based on its lowest operating cost, highest efficiency, and very importantly, the fact that the vehicles can be more productive, is the overhead catenary one. And that's the one that anyone who sees it first of all thinks it's completely mad, because who's going to invest in the infrastructure without the trucks being there and vice versa. But I won't bore everyone for the next hour as to why that could as to why that could work.
Are you saying that because that's not a cost John Lewis would have to bear?
We have to bear the cost of a lot of it either way. I mean, right now, with a typical battery heavy truck being about 350 grand, we are a long way from that being cost effective. Lower down the weight range, absolutely. It's a no-brainer to go electric. The challenge hydrogen has is that it's inefficient in the way it turns the energy that's gone to make it into actual work, and that probably makes it expensive for long distance heavy trucks. I know I'm in risk of being kneecapped as I leave the room here. But there's no doubt at all there are niches and areas where it will be the best option, or possibly the only option. You think of off-road machinery, think of certain terrains where transport is very undense. What I would like to see is DFT supporting not just the battery and the fuel cell trucks that they're doing right now, but also the catenary trial that was due to happen, because then once we have vehicles on the road, we've got proper data, proper learnings, we can actually come up with the right answers for these questions. I would also argue very strongly the point that if hydrogen is the right answer, then internal combustion engines for that should be looked at, because that makes access to it much easier, and the cost of the vehicles much lower. The challenges of having very, very pure hydrogen aren't there. So I'll ask Nick for a beer at the end of this, but that's for me that would be a very good approach if hydrogen is the answer.
Thank you. And we have one in the middle of the row there, halfway up with that. Thanks.
Hi guys, thanks for the information and presentations. I just wanted to ask, to drive the sustainability, we have to use the big data and these type of concepts along with that. So I'm just want to understand from your perspective with the data that is available and the requirement to analyze this data, or the need for smart devices to control, maintain, optimize certain aspects of the supply chain. So how do you see the opportunities for the supply chain in relation and the collaboration between the supply chain stakeholders and the IoT solution providers and the big data analytics providers or technologies? And how strong is this relationship according to you right now in the current scenario, and what might be the future scenario will be like?
Can I just have your name and where you're from?
Sorry, I'm John. I'm a student at University of Greenwich.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Shane.
So it's really, I think your question gets to the heart of the matter when it comes to actually driving system-wide decarbonisation initiatives, because ultimately this is about moving a product between different hands or vehicles or stages, and it's the totality of that movement, the totality of emissions through that chain that really is where the big savings can be achieved. The reality is data is actually quite easy to get hold of now. The technology available to monitor temperature or to monitor the products. We had a lot from this morning about monitoring the rotting of or the decomposition of vegetables, etc. All very, very possible. The problem is they all exist in their own ecosystems, and everyone is still sitting, whether it's the business owning all the data for its bit of the journey, or it's the provider of the equipment. They own the data for what's coming off their equipment, and everyone's using their own data systems, their own data platforms to do that. And much as any IT provider will tell me that you can use, what's the right phrase? That you can read each other's data and you can work across the two, but whenever you try and do that, it always fails. And so in some way, you don't rely on it. So reality is we've got to get to a point that we are not really that further forward when it comes to getting those different actors in the chain to agree on the same basis on which they're going to gather data, and therefore start opening up the opportunity for collaboration end to end on data through the supply chain. And so it is the thing we have to solve, but I don't think we're that close to solving it right now.
Yeah, big challenge. Justin, would you like to add anything from your perspective on that?
I think just very briefly, dead right, it's more important than ever to seek those kind of efficiencies that you'll get through the use of big data and optimizing pretty much every single aspect of the supply chain. But yeah, there's
and this issue of collaboration.
That's the one where sometimes commercial interests will act against what makes for the most efficient system.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that I guess as an industry we need to figure out. So what's really important from a customer differentiation point of view, and what's behind that where you can collaborate more, because that's just about reducing costs so everyone benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, have you got something to add?
Opportunity for honest broker somewhere, isn't it? We've got IGD, for example, who are more of a science house than a trade association, who might be able to do that. But it's all a matter of commerciality and anonymization, isn't it? And how we actually achieve that. But it would be good.
I've got no answers to that one, and I know we've been struggling with that for a long time. But I just want to bring it on to something else before we close for the break. So, one of the things I picked up on your presentation, Alastair, was the this issue of pre-cooling. So this was fascinating, right? So you're putting the produce into the truck warm, and your refrigeration system is really struggling to cope with that, and that has big challenges for your technology. And then you've got this opening and shutting the doors kind of issue, and you're doing that in today's climate, right? Under today's climate conditions, it's tough enough. And then you also talked about changing the set point for chilled product, and how that helps with energy, right? And kind of the impact that would have, which is really interesting. And Sean mentioned in his presentation, we've been doing a lot of work on changing the set point for frozen food recently. It's becoming a bit of a debate within the sector. Now, as the climate changes, so the sort of changes we're going to see in the climate going forward over the next, through to the end of this decade and into next decade, and we see the sort of summers that we had last year, occurring all the time here in the UK. More frequent, prolonged, and intense heat waves. Prolonged is the key word there. Intense and prolonged, and this sort of slow creeping up of the ambient temperature in each season. What impact is that going to have on your kind of systems, and are you factoring that into your thinking about how you're going to operate those systems, or how you're going to guarantee that operation, in 20 years' time, when last summer is like every summer?
That's all we ran through last summer very successfully. So we've done it already. So yeah. Yes, we do think about the systems designed to work in other countries such as Spain. So the great thing about our product is it's very universal. We design it once and it will work in every single other country. So mass adoption is the aim. So yeah, the system is designed to work in hotter climates already. It's an engineering specification.
Is that a cost though to your system?
No. So the problems I mentioned are not the ambient temperature. The ambient temperature is fine because you've got the thermal efficiency of the trailer. The fridge is designed to do it. It's the produce inside acting like a radiator fighting against it. That's the problem. Because once the doors are shut, it's air conditioning. It's just recycling the air and making it colder and colder over
So
time.
the product's going to be even hotter. And the when you put it in,
well,
it's going to be harder for the farmer to cool down.
It could be. I mean, the point being is, can they stay? Well, sorry, can the produce stay within the cold stores long enough to get to the right temperature? Is that an option?
Mm-hmm.
Do we really need to be? And I'm not an expert on this. Do we need to be moving food through the supply chain really that fast to put pressure on the suppliers? Some of them are literally taking it straight out of the fields, packaging it, and then straight into the trailers. But the last thing I'll just touch on is the great thing about our system is the synergy of the solar and heat. And heat comes from sun, so it's that supply and demand. So the warmer it gets, there's more sun, then we're collecting more energy to counteract the heat that is being in the ambient air. So that's the good nature
That's
of
the good
design
news.
system.
Shane, I can see you're wanting to say something.
Jumping at the bit.
Yeah.
As it says, keeping something at the same temperature is not the same energy job as taking stuff, transforming its temperature. And I think that's the point is, and I guess one of the things that happens is supply chains can get slack. They can start to sort of to run to a process of different. So, bakery goods, they come out there, they don't let them cool down enough, so they go into the refrigerated environment and they're using the truck or the cold store as the refrigeration point or the chill down point. Yeah. And that massively increases the work for that part of the supply chain. And it can be the most inefficient way of doing it. So it really is about having that kind of system-wide kind of oversight of where is the most effective point to put the energy in to achieve the outcome you need to achieve, which is back to the data point.
Back to this collaboration point.
But job one, make sure that trailers that aren't insulated, buildings that aren't well insulated are the biggest single problem in that, because if you've got the temperature, they're holding it at the right temperature, often you don't need to use the refrigeration equipment that much to retain the temperature if it's a sealed box and it's not a lot of temperature change in that space. So it's insulation, closing the doors, and just keeping an eye on the product temperature in a way that we're able to do now that we weren't able to do 100 years ago.
So the watchword's going to be baby. It's hot outside, not cold outside. Yeah. Last point. Just wanted you to pick up on that with Deliveroo and the conditions for your cyclists and things. If it's going to be getting hotter, how are you going to factor this into your AI model? So driver breaks for exhaustion, rehydration, these kind of things.
Yeah, so we already operate in obviously Middle East, Asia, and even in Southern Europe. So 40 degrees plus, are conditions that riders are used to operating in. Equally, we're very fortunate that a lot of our restaurant partners are really see the value that they can add back to the riders and actually, frankly, back to their end customers. And so we have deals with some of the biggest quick service restaurants in the country that offer free cold drinks to riders, free snacks to riders. So actually, we leverage the different parts of our network to actually provide that, because frankly, it's unfeasible for us to supply 150,000 riders on a particular day. So we do crowdsource that, and fortunately, because our restaurant and grocery partners really do see it as a partnership, because we're delivering their produce, their food, their goods, they're pretty bought into it. So
So you might just need to ask them to add in, allowing the rider to nip into the cold room for cold store for 5 minutes just to cool off before they go anywhere else.